Pastor Mike here in the study. The Bible tells us in the book of Ephesians in chapter number 6, fathers, provoke not your children to wrath. When we were on vacation last week, I was reading that text in a blog on that text, and the thought came to my mind, and I've always associated that verse with saying, fathers, don't be overbearing on your children. Don't be heavy-handed on them in the order to push them down and cause them to want to revolt in anger. And I think that can be implied in what it's saying, but I think it's also telling us that fathers, we're not to focus our children in anger toward anything. And I think we have to constantly bring a gospel approach to things that are wrong in the world and not just a human fleshly approach of anger toward those things. I think so often we can get so excessively against something, and it may be something we need to be against and we need to biblically stand against, that we leave being biblically opposed to it and we end up being fleshly angry with it. And fleshly anger is never going to bring about salvation to those who are caught up in that sin. The wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. And so when we are not provoking our children to wrath, I think we need to also bring it into the context of when we teach them what is right and what is wrong, that we're not teaching them to hate or be angry or to be rude or flippant or mocking of those who are in the wrong, but rather we teach them with a gospel-centered brokenheartedness over the sins of the world we live in, love for them, desiring for them to be right with God. No less than we're saying that sin is right or that sin is not wrong and that we should not be opposed to sin, but we're not to provoke our children to anger. I think in relationships, parents can pit their children against one another. That's provoking them to wrath. You're provoking them to be angry with somebody. Maybe you're provoking them to angry with your gossiping tongue toward another relative, or you're provoking them in anger with a critical attitude toward their teachers now that schools are starting back, or the school or the system that they're in, or even the church. Whatever it is that you would be stirring them up to anger toward, always stir them up to love one another as Christ would love them, discerning right and wrong. And we go back to the old adage, we need to stir them up to love the sinners, and we hate the sin, and we hate what the sin is doing to the sinner. And so I thought maybe a little broader scope that the Lord kind of brought to my mind, that I'm not to stir my children up to anger toward anything, not stirring them up to wrath, not provoking them to wrath. But what we should be challenging them to do is what Hebrews tells us when we gather together, that we're to provoke them unto love and to good works. And may that be our heart when we disciple our children. And I hope that it'll be an encouragement to you and a challenge in your walk with God this week. God bless you. We'll talk to you next time in the study.